Previously, in historic Formula One seasons, we recalled that year which witnessed one of the most impressive feats ever seen in the history of the top category of motorsport. The season in which a new team, rising from the ashes of a giant constructor and with very limited resources, managed to win the World Championship that year. 2009, which is definitely one of the most fantastic stories ever seen in Formula One. But this mini-series doesn't stop. And for this occasion, we will go back a few years in time to tell you about a season where a historic duel took place. The one that pitted Ferrari and Renault against each other in a battle of talent for the highest glory in motorsport. One of the most remarkable years of this century. Ladies and gentlemen, recall the year Fernando Alonso and Michael Schumacher faced off, representing the French and Italian brands, in one of the most exciting, controversial, and toughest battles in Formula One. Well, the 2006 season with its battles, historic moments, and confrontations deserves to be another chapter in this mini-series, so ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Welcome to Chapter 5 of Historic Campaigns of Formula One, the 2006 season. The 2006 Formula One season is remembered by fans as the one that saw one of the greatest showdowns between two titans of motorsport, Fernando Alonso and Michael Schumacher, and the intense rivalry between French constructor Renault and Formula One giant Ferrari. To grasp the importance of this battle and showdown, it's essential to understand the past context that resurface. The legendary 2006 season. 2005 in particular was a season that ended the streak of dominance and success that the Italian team had established since the 2000 season, where they never let go of the top spot, and the Formula One championships led by Michael Schumacher that dominated Formula One from 2000 to 2004. However, every beginning has an end, and a series of rule changes, including a regulation that prevented drivers from changing tires during the race and only allowed them to refuel, were introduced. It didn't sit well with the team, which allowed two new forces to join the fight for the throne that Ferrari was giving up. This caused a showdown between McLaren and Renault, where at the end of the season, not only would the French team win the constructors' title, their first title, but also Fernando Alonso, the Spanish driver, at 24 years old, was crowned Formula One world champion for the first time in his life, achieving the most important historic milestone of his career. For the year 2006, the regulations would have some important changes, such as abandoning the 3-liter V10 engines in favor of 2.4-liter V8 engines. And what about tire changes returning after the 2005 ban? So, except for this change, the cars would be very similar to what had been seen last season. The season where Fernando Alonso and Renault were crowned champions thanks to the combination of having a fast and reliable car, as well as the trustworthy hands of the Asturian driver, which allowed a victory over the team. McLaren, despite having a very fast car, had serious reliability problems, which meant that overall Renault was in complete heaven. But despite the successes achieved and being the reigning world champions, internally there were some cracks that needed to be fixed. Imagine winning your first world title and joining the Olympus of Formula One constructors. You find out that your driver, the one you won the title with, is going to drive for the rival team in 2 seasons. Well, that's it, ladies and gentlemen. This was happening at Renault after Alonso and McLaren announced on December 19, 2005 they would team up for the 2007 season. This put the Asturian in the awkward spot of racing all of 2006 knowing he joined McLaren the next season. This situation created uncertainty about how the driver and team would act from then on. But Fernando and Renault promised each other to remain completely professional until their relationship ended, even though the separation was absolutely imminent. Renault and Alonso knew their car could replicate their 2005 success. This was the R26, an extremely competitive car that, besides being fast and reliable, had an ace up its sleeve. A little secret, but when well implemented as they did, it gave their single-seater a pretty interesting advantage. This system was called the mass damper, a device that was implemented with the approval of the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile in 2005. But even though they used it in some races that season, it was in 2006 when they would get the most out of it. Being a system, it was a mass suspended at the front of the car, attached to springs and cylinders with shock absorber oil that made the damper move vertically up and down. With a 9-kilogram disc. With this small and seemingly simple device, the car experienced fewer vibrations and could tackle the curbs better than any other car. It also provided better response on patched asphalt and helped avoid as much as possible sudden movements of the car. Going back to the R26, a very fast and stable single-seater, which clearly gave the team an advantage over other rivals, the R26 was an extremely well-rounded car. It was the #1 candidate to take the titles and allow both Renault and Fernando Alonso to become two-time Formula One world champions. The weapons were ready and Renault knew what they had in their hands. However, they were not alone in this fight. On the other side of the ring, we have an Italian team that is, historically speaking, the most successful team in the history of Formula One. Ferrari's legendary prancing horse lost its dominance in 2005 after new regulations impacted its performance. And from dominating in 2004, in 2005 they struggled to win even once in a race with just 6 cars. Ferrari's decline, mainly caused by that regulation which required finishing the race with a single set of tires, had been very dramatic. But the team didn't give up after this moment. With the return of the regulation allowing tire changes during races, plus the proper implementation of their new V8 engine in the redesigned car, Ferrari had regained its competitiveness. All this to reclaim the throne lost in 2005. Despite their determination to reclaim it, they still had a top technical team and, importantly, 7-time world champion Michael Schumacher as their driver. All their work seemed to set the stage for the Italian brand's return to the fight. But their blue rivals obviously were not going to make things easy for them, not by a long shot. So 2006 looked like it could bring another exciting battle, with Renault at the top, but with Ferrari and McLaren wanting to knock them completely off their pedestal in a year, along with new teams like Toro Rosso, BMW, Sauber, Honda, Super Aguri and Midland. Also, with format changes like adding Q1, Q2 and Q3 qualifying sessions, new drivers but obviously the same ambitions for success and glory. And the 2006 Formula One season would start in the hot and treacherous desert of Sakir, kicking off an exciting, vibrant, controversial and truly spectacular season. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome! Welcome to the first round of the Formula One World Championship, the Bahrain Grand Prix. The Bahrain circuit, which joined Formula One in 2004, would open the top category, to start another season that had raised many questions after the preseason, but where everything pointed to Renault returning to its position as the favorite this season. But just like last year, there would be a challenger who wouldn't make things so easy for them. From the beginning of the year, that challenger was Ferrari, which took pole position for that Grand Prix with a very good lap from Michael Schumacher. And right behind, the new member of this team after Rubens Barrichello's departure, the Brazilian Felipe Massa, showing that Ferrari was back in the game and ready to fight. For his part, the title favorite, Fernando Alonso, would start in 4th position. But confidence was on his side, and in the race, anything could happen. At the start, Fernando quickly moved into 3rd, and just a few corners later, confidently overtook Felipe Massa's Ferrari for 2nd. So in just a few corners, the Grand Prix turned into a duel between Michael Schumacher and Fernando Alonso. In the first laps, the Asturian just tried to stay close and wait for a chance. But Felipe quickly started to attack him, trying to regain that 2nd place, and the Brazilian's pace seemed promising. Until one mistake ruins everything. Felipe made a mistake. Miraculously, he didn't take Fernando Alonso out, and now, thanks to this, the Asturian now had a clear path to focus on his pace against Michael Schumacher, while Felipe was forced to drop positions. He had to pit after completely destroying that tire, and a very slow stop would completely ruin his race. But in this first stint, Schumacher's pace was very solid, lap after lap. The 7-time world champion was pulling away from the Asturian. waiting to see who would be the first to pit for their first tire change and refueling. On lap 14, Schumacher was the first to stop, so Alonso needed to stretch the stint, trying to make it last longer with the little fuel his car had at that moment. Stopping until lap 18. Though he would emerge behind the German driver, this stint was when he aimed for the Grand Prix lead. The Asturian quickly flew over Bahrain's asphalt, trying to catch Michael Schumacher. And in just a few laps, he managed to close the gap and become bigger and bigger in the mirrors of the red car. With 32 laps to go, Fernando was already within less than a second, and his threat was completely real. But at least for the moment, the 7-time champion was able to prevent Alonso from overtaking. For several laps, Schumacher made Fernando read his rear wing sponsors. But within this equation, there was still a pit stop to make, and that's where the key to the race would be. With 22 laps left, Schumacher makes his last stop, leaving Alonso back on track again with less fuel in the tank and without the German blocking him. It was Alonso's moment to completely turn this race around. Alonso would extend for 3 more laps looking for that gap that would keep him safe, since it was his only chance to win the race. And on lap 39, it was the moment of all or nothing. Renault executes a perfect maneuver and Alonso narrowly gets ahead of Michael Schumacher. The Kaiser would have 18 laps to try overtaking the Asturian driver. But at this moment now, the tables had turned, and for the German, it now seemed almost impossible to make the overtake. He tried to surprise him in some corners to make him nervous, but simply and plainly, Fernando did not give up his position. Alonso did what he needed after executing that strategy well. So when lap 57 arrived, Alonso and Renault struck first and with a masterful strategy won the first race of the 2006 season. The French team earned the first 10 points, beginning a dominant season. In Malaysia, they extended their streak with Giancarlo Fisichella winning and Fernando Alonso finishing second. He reached that position even after a Q3 issue made him start from 8th place, where Ferrari also had a disastrous afternoon, with their drivers finishing only 5th and 6th. Ferrari's drama continued in Australia, where Mazza crashed in turn 1 after contact with Christian Klien from Red Bull. And Schumacher, well, he wouldn't have a very good time in this Grand Prix either. It was a disastrous weekend for the prancing horse who, from the pit wall and with their cars wrecked, could only watch as. Once again, Renault took the victory with Fernando Alonso, and in the drivers' standings, the gap kept growing in favor of Renault and the 2005 World Drivers' Champion. After 3 races, Alonso led with 28 points. Fisichella was second with 14 and Schumacher fourth with 11. In the constructors' standings, Renault led by a wide margin with 42 points, while McLaren was second with 23 points. Scuderia Ferrari placed third with 15 points in their tally. This start of the season was going pretty badly for the prancing horse, with 3 Grands Prix where they were not only beaten by Renault, but had also made many mistakes. And if they didn't want the fight to start slipping out of their control, they urgently needed to win and make up points no matter what. Fortunately for the Reds, the 4th World Championship round is at Imola's Enzo Gino Ferrari circuit for the San Marino Grand Prix. So the Italian team would race with the boost from their fans, desperately needing to win and cut points from all their rivals. And it seemed that everything was lining up for that purpose. Schumacher took pole position for the Grand Prix, with Jenson Button's Honda second and Rubens Barrichello third. Meanwhile, Fernando Alonso must start from 5th. So Schumacher absolutely needed to win and start closing the points gap if he didn't want the championship to slip through his fingers. In so few races this season, Schumacher kept his lead while Alonso moved to 4th. In the first corners of this Grand Prix, which had gone by rather calmly, suddenly the screen showed a car that had been in a very serious accident. The car in front was Christian Albers, a driver for the Midland team who was hit by the Super Aguri driven by Yuji Aide. And yes, I know what you're thinking, and of course we're going to talk about this poor guy. So let's pause the race commentary for a moment. Yes, go ahead and pause it, and let's talk about Yuji Ide. Yuji, a Japanese driver, debuted in Formula 1 in 2006 with the Super Aguri team. He debuted at 31 but still left a positive legacy. In lower categories, for example, he was second in the 1999 Japanese Grand Touring Championship. He won Formula Dreams and placed third in Formula Nippon in 2004 and second in 2005. In addition to having a lot of championships with decent performances in different competitions around the world, but he definitely didn't have what it takes to get a Formula 1 seat. Even so, he met a visionary in his lifetime who had a dream, Aoguri Suzuki, who dreamed of having a completely Japanese team in Formula 1. Because of course, why look for the best drivers available to build a successful team? If you can get two Japanese drivers and don't mind that one lacks international championship experience? And I don't even want to get into the fact that the guy built his team with 2001 cars because that's another story. Anyway, let's continue with Yuji. After forming the team, Super Aguri signed Takuma Sato and Yuji Ide as official drivers for 2006 at the last minute. But while Sato already had experience in Formula 1, Yuji, well, he didn't even know how to speak English. So with no international experience, never having driven in Formula 1, and with a driver who couldn't speak anything but Japanese, tell me, what could possibly go wrong? But look, in his first race, his pace was insanely slow compared to Takuma Sato, and on top of that, in that race he ended up running over a mechanic in the pits. For Malassi, would he try to change his mindset? Winner's mentality, 21 losers. I'm breakfast. Same story for the Japanese driver. And in Australia? The guy spun out during qualifying and could have recovered by reversing to get back on track and continue the session. But this beast of a machine, legend, artist, titan, genius, giant, tsunami, tidal wave, earthquake, Shiki, my father, your father, our champion. He didn't know how to put the car in reverse, and since the team was Japanese but only the drivers, the engineers weren't Japanese, and Yuji's engineer from. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't tell him to put it in reverse. And after 3 agonizing minutes, he gave up trying to put the car in reverse and ended up getting out of it, abandoning the qualifying session. With this in mind, anyone might think that our star, our beast of a driver, maybe wasn't ready for Formula 1. Unfortunately, he confirmed it. At the Imola circuit, where Cassie sends Christian Albers to an exclusive meet and greet with Ayrton Senna. Oguri Suzuki and the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile had enough, excluded him from the next race, and eventually revoked his super license. He was never able to compete in Formula 1 again for the rest of his life. He is remembered as one of the worst drivers in top circuit history, having competed in just 4 races. But anyway, now that we've told you the story of Yuji Hyde, let's get back to our topic. After the accident, a safety car had to come out to remove the driver and the car from the track. A safety car stayed out for a few laps before the Grand Prix restarted, with Schumacher still leading. Alonso, for his part, would have to overtake Felipe Massa and Jenson Button to get within reach of Michael. And on a track where passing is so tough, the mission looked very difficult for the Asturian driver and for a good part of the race. Alonso seemed to have no chance of catching his direct rivals during the early stages of the race. Schumacher seemed completely unbeatable. Even during these early pit stops, he had managed to build a solid advantage for himself. And even after the pit stops, Alonso was able to jump up to second place, thanks to strategy and poor stops by his rivals. There was already a 10-second gap between Michael and Fernando Alonso, so it seemed that the Kaiser was on his way to his second victory of the season. But at this point, things were about to take a turn for the worse. For him, that second stint was terrible. Schumacher was suffering from graining on his tires and was losing a lot of time per lap, and in a span of 8 laps. After Schumi's last pit stop, Alonso had made up those 10 seconds that existed between them. And this was the exact point where we saw a repeat of the battle we had witnessed on this same circuit in 2005. With 28 laps left, the Asturian was behind the German, who had a much faster pace, but this time the 2005 battle was reversed. Schumacher defended against constant attacks from Fernando Alonso, who couldn't overtake him despite his efforts. On a track where we all know overtaking is usually very difficult, lap after lap, Schumacher prevented the overtake, and no matter how close Alonso got, he couldn't get past him. In a defensive showcase by the Ferrari driver. And since Fernando couldn't get past the Kaiser, Renault decided to pit Fernando Alonso on lap 41 to try to win the race through strategy. Stopping before the Kaiser made his last pit stop, so Schumacher's stop was imminent. And the only way to beat him with this decision was for Fernando Alonso's outlap to be absolutely overwhelming. But he encountered Michael, who also flew on the last lap of his final stint, squeezing the car to the maximum with low fuel. So at this point it depended on Ferrari and their group of mechanics to be able to save the result of this race. The move worked out for Ferrari, who, thanks to the low fuel, managed to make Schumacher's last lap good enough to defend the lead of the race. And with the pit stops over, Alonso would have to overtake Schumacher on track if he wanted to win this Grand Prix. For his part, Alonso didn't let Schumacher get away and stayed very close to the German, looking for any gap to overtake him, but the result was practically the same. Schumacher defended himself with everything he had, preventing any overtaking by Fernando. No matter how hard he tried, he simply could never find the perfect opportunity to take the lead in the race. So when lap 62 came, Ferrari achieved its first victory of the season with Michael Schumacher at the circuit that bears the name of the creator of this brand. This win brought Schumacher closer to Fernando in the standings, and his strong form continued at the European Grand Prix in Nürburgring, where he won with a great strategy. Pace beats Renault and Fernando Alonso for a second consecutive time. Although the French team responded at the next Grand Prix in Spain, Alonso dominated with an unbeatable pace. He earned his first win while chasing, fulfilling another Formula One dream. After this race, Alonso led the drivers' standings with 54 points. Schumacher was second with 39. And in the Constructors' Championship, Renault was leading with 78 points compared to Ferrari's 59. And even though there was still a lot of the championship left, it was clear that the tension was going to rise between the main and top contenders for the crown. In that season, Schumacher and Alonso were firing up Formula One with their rivalry, while the pressure between them was going to increase race by race. And for the next Grand Prix, it takes place on the streets of Monaco. The pressure was going to lead one of them to take things too far and to one of the biggest scandals ever seen in Formula One. The Monaco Grand Prix qualifying was held on Saturday, May 27th. In these sessions, Fernando Alonso and Renault showed their strength, appearing to be favorites for pole position on a track where it determines 90% of the race. During the final minutes and their last qualifying attempts, Schumacher took first place, but Fernando Alonso was on pace to secure pole position until someone made a mistake. That car you're seeing there is Michael Schumacher's Ferrari, which conveniently ended up blocking the middle of the track at the Rascasse corner. And since no other driver could improve their times because of the yellow flag, Alonso couldn't complete his final lap. And with this, in a very suspicious way, Schumacher secured pole position for the Monaco Grand Prix. The thing here is that nobody believed Schumacher that this was due to a mistake. Many drivers and people in the paddock directly said that this wasn't fair and that Schumacher had faked that maneuver to trigger the yellow flags and thus secure first position. The criticism for this was extremely harsh, with drivers saying it wasn't fair and people in the paddock saying that these cheap tricks affect Formula One. Naturally, Renault asked the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile to give Schumacher a severe penalty for his actions. In fact, Keke Rosberg, the 1982 world champion, even said that it's the dirtiest and meanest action he has ever witnessed in Formula One, and that Schumacher should leave the competition after what he had done. For his part, when Schumacher was asked directly what had happened, he denied any accusation, saying that he simply locked the brakes and ran out of track, denying any accusation of having made a deliberate maneuver. However, the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile didn't believe Ferrari or Schumacher. And after many hours of deliberation, the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile ultimately found Michael Schumacher responsible for unsportsmanlike obstruction of his rivals, with the maneuver of parking the car at the Rascasse corner. And his penalty would be extremely harsh, as the stewards determined that he made a completely unnecessary counter-steering maneuver that lasted for 5 meters, until there was no longer any possibility of taking the corner normally, finding, in the words of steward Joaquin, "It's pathetic and unjustifiable to lose the car at such a low speed during the maneuver." And his punishment would be very severe, as they would make him start from the back of the grid as punishment for his deliberate action. Obviously, this did not please Ferrari at all, who completely disagreed with the decision, with Jean Todt even saying that he was outraged by the decision. But despite this, they couldn't do anything, and Schumacher would have his Monaco Grand Prix practically ruined. This gave Alonso pole position, and he dominated the race from start to finish. And although Schumacher was able to come back to finish 5th in a rather outstanding feat, the Asturian managed to take another 6 points from him in this race. Only here, Alonso's pace didn't stop, and in the next Grand Prix, the British Grand Prix, it was another dominant beating by the Asturian driver, who won by pulling 13 seconds ahead of Michael Schumacher, who managed to finish in 2nd place. The Kaiser was desperate to cut down points, but Canada was a very complicated race. He lost positions at the start while Alonso easily led, but with strong pace and strategy, he recovered to finish 2nd. He couldn't prevent Fernando Alonso from taking the victory and securing his 4th consecutive win and 6th of the season. And that the points difference increased to 25 between them. Maybe. With the numbers used in Formula 1 nowadays, 25 points might not be much, but under the old scoring system, 25 points were more than a 2-win difference. At this point in the season, at the season's halfway point, it appears Fernando Alonso is heading for a 2nd championship, with Renault likely to win the constructors' title again. The gap in both standings was significant, and unless things changed, it would be hard for the prancing horse to reverse it. Ferrari was desperate to win at any cost, since continued point losses would make catching up impossible for the rest of the season. And if there was any hope of recovering, it had to come in the United States at the legendary Indianapolis circuit. Here, things seemed to improve for the prancing horse and get much worse for Fernando Alonso. From qualifying, it was clear that this was not going to be a particularly favorable circuit for them. When Schumacher took pole position and Alonso could only manage 5th, more than half a second behind what the Kaiser set during the start. The Ferraris managed to defend their lead, but with Massa slipping into 1st place and Schumacher following in 2nd, while Alonso stayed behind, moving up to 3rd position. But once they got through the first corners, there was another very violent crash. Just in this first lap, in these first corners, 7 drivers were out of the race, where Nick Heidfeld in his BMW flipped violently after a collision with Juan Pablo Montoya. Earlier, a crash between Mark Webber and Christian Klein led to more retirements, totaling 7 drivers out in the opening moments. An accident that would obviously bring out the safety car. When the race resumed, Ferrari stayed dominant in this Grand Prix, but Alonso couldn't match the red car's pace. All weekend he struggled with an unstable car, and just a few laps after the restart, Fisichella overtook the Spaniard, dropping him to 4th, a move that surely displeased Flavio Briatore. That Grand Prix was tough for Alonso, as he lacked pace and was even passed by Jarno Trulli's Toyota after the pit stops. With the Asturian driver's pace completely gone, while Ferrari dominated the race and a slow pit stop by Felipe Massa allowed Schumacher to take the Grand Prix lead, he held it nearly until the end. In the end, the results combined to create a disastrous race for Alonso, who couldn't get past 5th place. After many races without a win finally, Schumacher achieved victory at the United States Grand Prix and gained 6 valuable points in his fight to win his 8th crown as the top champion in the highest category of motorsport. This Grand Prix was a boon for the Italian team, who capitalized on their rivals' struggles to secure a 1-2 finish that felt glorious at that stage of the season. But while Ferrari and Renault were in the middle of an intense battle for the titles, McLaren was in very bad shape. After having fought for the driver's title in 2005 with Kimi Räikkönen in 2006, they had a car with ongoing reliability issues and a flawed design, causing the Woking team's competitiveness to drop sharply. On top of this, things within the organization were very chaotic. Ron Dennis and Juan Pablo Montoya had a strained relationship after frequent disagreements and clashes caused by their strong personalities. Ron, who was practically the boss of McLaren, felt disappointed with Juan Pablo Montoya's results, while Juan Pablo didn't enjoy the atmosphere within McLaren, much less the car he was driving. And the crash caused by the Colombian at the start of the United States Grand Prix was the straw that broke the camel's back. So that Ron Dennis made the decision not to continue with the Colombian, while at the same time, he also didn't want to continue in Formula 1. They parted ways by mutual agreement. With few races left in the season, Ron Dennis let third driver Pedro de la Rosa join the main team. He would have his chance again at the wheel of the McLaren and would be the one to finish the season. At this point, McLaren was wounded, but Ron Dennis wasn't looking for who caused it, but who would pay for it. At this point, one of their main problems was that, unlike top rivals, they didn't know how to properly implement the Mazda Ampere in their cars. Renault had fully integrated this into their R26, developing the car around the concept, while Ferrari had already implemented theirs and it was working well. Besides, by this point, Red Bull already had their own version and other teams were already on their way to bringing their own versions. Regarding the Mazda Ampere, this part had become so vital that even Ferrari and Renault experimented with having two Mazda Amperes in the car, one in the front and the other in the rear, to further improve the balance of the car. So, seeing that they simply couldn't implement it correctly, they started putting a lot of pressure on the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile to ban the use of these devices, arguing that they were dangerous elements that actively modified the car's aerodynamics. Due to McLaren's complaints and pressure, the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile investigated the matter. Well, regardless of how this investigation came about, the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile saw that this lightweight mass damper thing was getting out of control, especially in terms of safety. They argued that in an accident, a 5-kilogram mass flying off would be very dangerous for rivals. In addition, they also validated the argument that it actively modified the car's aerodynamics and that this device, the same one they made, was valid for use by Renault. Since 2005, it had been violating the technical regulations, stating that the rules said any part that had an aerodynamic influence on the car had to be rigidly attached to it. The lightweight mass floated and therefore violated the regulations in Article 3.15 of its section on movable aerodynamic devices. So the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile made a decision that would be quite controversial, and for the German Grand Prix, its use was completely banned. McLaren had gotten away with it. Ferrari didn't mind this news so much, but there was one team that didn't like it at all. It was Renault, who had developed and designed the R26 completely around the concept of the mass damper. So taking it away from their car would affect them much more than the rest of the cars on the grid. And with how tough the fight between Renault and Ferrari was, this would be very serious for them, so Alonso and Renault were in serious trouble. After Schumacher won the French Grand Prix, he cut the gap between them to 17 points. If they didn't solve this and prevent the device from being declared illegal, they could have a very deep wound that wouldn't stop bleeding until the end of the season, so Renault was in serious trouble. Meanwhile, Ferrari had the opportunity they had been looking for to turn both championships around, being so close to the end of the season. This would make the second half of 2006 even more intense, more controversial, and much more on the edge.